a script, a screenplay, based on true real life incidents. And I mean, what is the reaction of your friends when they realize, oh, okay, you put their stories or you put it in a book?
But this is not a novel, it's a work of non-fiction.
Okay.
So I told all of them that I want to interview you for the book. So it's basically a real sort of a look at the real women in India, the real stories of arranged marriages, some happy, some unhappy, some which ended in divorce. So all of them knew about it, and before I sent them to my publisher, I sent it to them and said, are you okay with all this? Because some of them went with their real names. And I think some of them didn't have unhappy stories, but they didn't want their mothers-in-law reading about their sex lives, you know, so.
I was just coming to that, like if you got into the intimate details of, you know, what happens in a married environment as opposed to, you know, live-in relationships, or you know, there's so many different arrangements going on now in India or Mumbai. So, you know, how did you tackle that touchy subject?
I think you should buy the book and find out.
Okay, I'll buy the book.
I'm plugging myself.
Everyone buy her book, yeah? Okay, cool.
Thank you.
My question is for Fahad Samar, because yours is the only book I've read, and I'm also a writer. I was very surprised with the end, and I want to know, because you work in the film industry, did you make 3 ends? One this, second this, third this, and then you sat across with your wife and said, which is the best, and came to that?
That's a marvelous question. Actually, one review had sort of, Femina gave me a glowing review, praised the sex scenes in the novel and all, which I was mortified about, but ended up saying the one thing that they found was that it had a surprisingly happy ending. And when I spoke to the editor, I said, well, if you read the book, it's a series of happy endings right through the book. But as far as this is concerned, no, it's a very pertinent question, because when I started writing it, and certainly the template I wrote earlier had a much darker, twisted, twist and ending to it. But as I was writing, I fell in love with these characters and suddenly became far more charitable towards them. And I think at the end of the day, you know, when you have, you're writing a novel, and of course you want the narrative arc, and you're writing within all the constructs of a, of a novel, you also realize that readers do want a resolution at the end. It needn't necessarily always be happy. So some people get their comeuppance, some people find the proverbial happy ending. But yes, I did struggle with it for a little while, but no, I didn't need to consult my wife. And
my question is to Sarkar, and I would like to know whether Helen of Troy was an imaginary character. Was she an imaginary character, or Helen of Troy that you were talking about?
Oh, all right. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's straight from mythology.
Right.
And so she, mythology always does have some base in reality, but it's entirely, it's meant to be the story of a civilization. So it's meant to be a real story. But at the end of the day, it is a work of fiction, without any doubt.
And did Milton really get blind when he wrote this Paradise Lost?
Yes, actually, Milton went blind in 1642, and he wrote Paradise Lost in the 1650s. So he was totally blind when he wrote it. And he would have, amazing man, he would have a set of 3 people sitting with, pen and paper, dictate a few lines to each. That's how Paradise Lost was written. And afterwards, he got all of these passages together, read out to him, and told them how to arrange these lines, which comes in book 1, which comes in book 6, and so on. So it was all there in his head. And, a long work like this never starts from line 1 of book 1, ending with the last line of book 12. So passages written at different parts of time, but then put together seamlessly. So when we read it today, it seems as if it was written from line 1 onwards, and entirely by a totally blind man.
Hi. I want to ask something, like today's topic is romantic novels kill it for real life. Isn't it the other way around nowadays when real life is killing romance? Because I think the most romantic thing I hear my kids talking about is, oh, he can cook. Or, you know, like after a hard day's work, you'll come back and the kids say that, oh, nice shoulder rub. So that is because we worked so hard during the day. So what is romance as romance today? Is really coming into real life, or what is it? I mean, my question would be probably, isn't real life killing romance now? Anyone can say, it's just a thought.
Well, when I was reading this, because as you know, I've read one romantic novel in my life in the true thing at the tender age of 13. So when I was reading up on this, one of the things I found was studies have shown that people, the criticism is that it's a formula. You follow a formula. You have the girl, meets the hunky man, finds love ignite after X amount of time, and then you literally ride off into the sunset. The big question is what happens after you ride off into the sunset, and I think that is the question that you are asking.
Yes.
That these little things that kindle romance, that sustain romance, that keep marriages alive, that you know, the nurturing and the loving, that is really the little things where also people don't, you know, when the passion goes out the window, all of that, how do you keep that alive? I think those are the novels that today probably have far more resonance than, you know, vampires and sort of busy necking and giving hickeys to one another. So,
I was, you know, to answer your question about whether romance gets in the way of real life, I was just thinking about this conversation I had with a friend of mine, a Pakistani friend, and we were speaking about poets. And, you know, she was saying how nice it must be to be married to Faiz or Ghalib, and, you know, I think it must be quite a headache. Imagine if you have to listen day in and day out to all these, you know, all this poetry that they are writing. And it's probably not about you. He's probably imagining some sort of muse, and you can't tell him his lines suck. And, you know, I mean, Ghalib, as far as I know, I think had about 8 or 9 or maybe more children. And he'd be writing poetry when these children were being born and when they were dying and God knows what else. How would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, but you know, again, your question set me thinking about a marvelous film. It's called Love Among the Ruins. If you can get hold of it, it's a really, really great film about two people who had fallen in love when they were young, and they had gone separate ways, and they meet again when they're both quite old. And it's not surprising that, you know, films of that kind about love and age should appeal to me today. I've been married for 44 years, not an arranged marriage, but you know, at the end of it all, and now when I, you know, read literature and I look at films like this, and there are still today great films being made and great literature being written about what happens after that fairy tale ending. Take a poem like Keats's Eve of St. Agnes, the two lovers escape into the storm. Thereafter, what happens with their lives? Do they continue happy? Or, you know, life is about various other things. Does love abide or not? So these are, you know, great questions that there are still some very thoughtful films being made and books being written that look into this.
Hello. Hello. My question is to all of us and the writers in particular who write romance, who have been writing fiction. Maybe I am from that era. Romance has been going on from, say, times immemorial, you know. We read lots of, but there was a kind of sobriety to the prose that was written, maybe Paradise Lost and Helen of Troy, and even Mills and Boone for that matter. But do you think the whole prose, the context is too stark these days, that it hurts at times, you know? I think the days of the the butterflies and the birds were better, were symbolic. But now the language, for instance, Nandini's book, which speaks of arranged marriages, is also talking of, well, I don't want to use the word, but the text contains some, very open, intimate scenes. So do you think we are doing justice to it, or maybe it is the so-called cool to, present times generation demands it? I find it little too stark. The Bollywood and that Fahad you have spoken of seems so true to the real life scenario as of today. But again, having read a few pages, I think I was blushing in my age of 64 years also.
Well, bless you. It's wonderful you were only blushing because a lady, 70-year-old lady came up to me in Goa and said she had an orgasm after many, many years. So I'm thrilled that this is what's happening. And if I can bring a little joy into the lives of others, I'm in their service.
I'm talking of ages from, say, 10 to 70.
Of course, I'm being facetious, and I understand. Of course, it's a construct. If you're writing a commercial novel, you're working in the ambit of mass market fiction. Yes, you may think you work within certain things. As I said, I was terrified when I was told by well-wishers and friends that you need to throw in some sex scenes, and I thought I'm going to be nominated for some bad sex writing award. And well, I took the plunge, and the results have been quite pleasing. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's as much a function of the market demanding it, which is not to say that there's a lot of erotica written right through the ages, and it's just that we don't end up reading it with as much vigor as we do commercial fiction these days.
I would actually dispute your the notion that romance is necessarily popular fiction, though maybe the converse is true. Popular fiction is necessarily romance. But I mean, like Nadeem Aslam, for instance, I think with his very first book he spoke about how his father told him to always write about love because people will always want to read about love. And all of his books talk about, I mean, they're set in places where terrorism happens or, where honor killings happen or whatever. But then love is at the core of it, and he describes there are really beautiful passages. He's one of my favorite authors, and he only writes about love. Or Vikram Seth, for instance. I mean, I think again all his books are about love, and Equal Music is about different kinds of love. And I wouldn't say any of these are not romances. But then if you're speaking about this commercial fiction genre, that's one which I have problems with. I mean, in Fahad's case, it's satire, and that's something completely different. And when it's done wittily, it's amazing. I loved his book. But when you look at romance, which is written grammatically incorrectly by, either people who are just out of college or who say, okay, I had a love story and I'll tell it my way, and you can buy it for 100 rupees or whatever. I think that's quite horrible, and I think, that's killing readership, because now everyone reads. Earlier, if you read Amitabh Ghosh, or you read Vikram Seth, or you read Arundhati Roy. Now, you can be a reader irrespective of whom you read. I'm not sure who's in the audience, so I should probably not mention names. But then, maybe the best-selling authors here in India are popular writers and writers who write grammatically incorrectly. In fact, in Calcutta, at the Oxford bookstore, I read there was this one section of Metro Reads or whatever, and this is one girl who's written, I'm not her author blurb says, I'm not a grammarian, in fact, I hate the rules of grammar. Now, why are you writing a book in English? If you hate the rules of grammar in English, don't write in English. If you hate the rules of grammar in Bengali, don't write in Bengali, I don't understand why she's writing a book and why she expects to be read. So, that's my take.
So I would just like to put in my last bit that on the one hand, my basic main question was, we are glorifying sex as such, even if it is, it is showing a mirror to the real life. But when a case like Tarun Tejpal happens, and so many of the like, we are the first ones to gun them down, and we are all together in one voice, we say that this is wrong. But so the whole concept gets a little confusing. We are glorifying it in our text, in our romance, in our love stories, but when it comes to real life, So perhaps the audience, the reader doesn't know whether this is right or this was right, whether my parents were right or perhaps now when I have to go along with the times, the modern times as they say. So maybe I am from the old school.
I don't know if I'd say I was just saying, Fahad doesn't glorify sex. I mean, it's a very satirical take on sex. That kind of
But we
sex,
accept it as it is, and the book is written beautifully, I agree, though I have read just a bit of it. But, okay,
They're interesting bits.
I stand confused. I stand confused that,
Yeah.
you know, the real life...
Well, if I would also agree with you with what you're saying. I think one of the criticisms against romantic literature, this kind of young adult literature, is also the fact that it conditions women to be subservient, to imagine that the man is going to make the first move and do certain things where no means yes. And I think that is exactly what you're talking about, this incident that you're referring to, where no means no, and unfortunately a lot of women have been conditioned. So it is when the man finds it very odd when he faces resistance and that doesn't know how to deal with it, and this is when you end up in Goa without a beach view.
Thank you.
If Malavika was going to respond to that as well.
I was just going to say from my point of view as a professor that if you look at the history of literature, this is a question of, ways of writing, styles of writing, content.